Hello there, and welcome to this webinar on the delivery cluster booklet. Ultimately, this is the second cluster that you'll be going through if you are doing your full course TAE program with Success Training Academy. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this webinar. Just like in previous webinars, you'll find that this particular cluster is broken up into two webinars. We're going to have the short answer questions webinar, where I'm going to walk you through the short answer questions and how to best answer them, but also where to find the information to answer the questions. Some of the times I'll be saying check out the textbook that you get in class and the one that you can find on the student portal. Other times I'll be saying check out Google, because often Google is going to provide the answers for us even quicker. So this webinar is going to cover the short answer questions. In another webinar dedicated specifically to this cluster booklet, I'm going to cover the projects that you will go through for this particular delivery cluster. Okay, so I'm hoping that the format is making sense to you so far. I'm hoping that you've taken the time to watch the other webinars as well, and slowly the pieces are coming into place. Okay, so let's get into it and let's take a look at what we've got in this booklet. So very similar to the other ones, learn a name. Please print, pop it in. Training venue, you can either put distance or you can put wherever you are undertaking your course. So that could be Southport, it could be Melbourne, it could be Brisbane, it could be wherever you are undertaking your course. All right, trainer name, if you're unaware of this, just leave this blank. If you are aware of it, you can certainly put that in. All right, now commencement date is the date that you enrolled in the course, okay? So we're going to come down the instructions and resources, assessment process. You can read that at your own leisure. All right. Now, one thing I will say at this point is if you ever see a booklet that is slightly different, it's got any type of different formatting or any kind of things at all, just know that fundamentally the content will be the same, but just as any company does, we do update our materials. It is quite a challenge to update the webinar every single time we update the books. So just be mindful that you may see slight things that are different, but know that fundamentally the content is going to be exactly the same. All right, so you may see one or a couple more questions or a couple less questions, but know that fundamentally the book is exactly the same. I just need to say that because sometimes we get some calls saying, oh, my book looks different to what it is on the webinar. Yep, that's totally fine. We do update the books quite regularly. Okay, so going through this area here, it's pretty much just the stock standard admin procedures, stuff like that. All right, cover sheet and agreement, definitely put your name, definitely sign it, and put the date of your signature. Okay, now as I mentioned previously, you can either print off this booklet and you can work on handwritten, or you can work on them electronically, and you can print off that section and attach it to the projects that you work through in class. Okay, so let's get your name of assessor, date received, date review completed. You can leave that section blank. Okay, all right, this section, again, fill out your name, put the start date, and put you can leave that blank, and the rest of this part is for the assessor to fill out. Okay, coming down, we've got your name again, unit start date, fill that in, and leave the rest blank. All right, so we got learner name is your name, and unit start date, and leave the rest blank. Okay, so you can skip through that. Now, let's take a look at these short answer questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question for you. I'm going to give you some background information to the question, and as best as possible, I'm going to give you some examples and ways that you could answer the question most effectively. Keep in mind, you are going to have to meet the criteria of a Cert 4 answer. What does that mean? What does it sound like? essentially, a Cert 4 answer is that it has a couple of sentences to it, it's got an example to it, and it's in your own wording, if that makes sense. All right. Ultimately, one word answer is not enough. And we are not expecting paragraphs, but we are asking for some good levels of thought that's gone into your answer. Okay. So as we go through this, the textbook chapters that are most relevant are chapters 4, 5, and 6, and possibly 7 as well. Okay. And you'll receive a copy of the textbook when you come to class. Also, there is a copy of the textbook on the student portal that you'll be able to access as soon as you enroll and make your payment. So let's get into it. What elements form part of a learning program documentation? All right, so essentially the question's asking you, in terms of a training program, what documents might you come across? Well, you might come across session plans, you might come across the units, you might come across the enrollment information for the student, so enrollment forms, you might come across the language literacy and numeracy tests, you might come across things like location, the information about the location. You might come across information such as the dates, the times, who the trainer will be, and the items from the units are going to be covered. You're going to find that in the session plan. You're going to find what equipment would be required. Okay, so I'd like you to think about all the items that would go into a learning program and what would make up that documentation. What kind of information would you see in that document? Okay. So, question 2. In the learning environment, what information documentation can be used to identify the needs of your learners? So, let's just imagine that you were conducting a training session next Tuesday, and there was lots of information that you wanted to know about your students before you conducted the training session. So, how would you gather that? Well, you could gather it through resumes, you could gather it through pre-enrollment interviews, you could gather it through, enrollment forms and sort of informal, sheets or information gathering interviews. Could be paper-based. And we could also find that information out from employers and through resumes, previous qualifications, all those different methods. Okay. And that could be online, offline as well. Okay. List 3 environments in which you may face constraints to session delivery. Now, these can be like logistical constraints, these could be environmental constraints, these could be student constraints, all these different kind of things could come into play with this question. So you've got to pick the ones that you think will be most relevant for you in your industry. But ones that immediately come to mind for me are weather. So you've got to have the right weather conditions to do it, the right venue and the right location. And when you're answering this question, you would answer it such as venue. The venue would need to be wide enough, and the size of the room would be very important so that everybody could perform XYZ action. If it was too small, that would be a constraint. Okay, so we've got another environment could be where we have students with LLM challenges. What else? Another environment could be delivering training outside. Another one could be in a very hazardous environment, and you could describe that hazardous environment. You could describe a corporate culture that was very toxic. Okay, and you could just think about any environment that would be very tricky and difficult to present in. Okay. Question 4. List 5 current learning theories that are applied to vocational education and explain how they might be used to optimize the learning experience. So this question is asking you to basically Google learning theories, okay, and then have a think about how could you apply that theory in your training environment? Let's just go with that. So I'll give you a hint, and I'll say that one of them could be behaviorist learning theory. Now, behaviorist learning theory is about people learn best through positive and negative reinforcement. People learn best through positive and negative reinforcement. So within a training session, we want to acknowledge great behavior, and we also want to set very clear expectations and boundaries so that people know how not to behave as well. Okay, so if you wanted to answer this question, the best way to handle it would be go to Google, type in learning theories, and you're going to find an abundance of learning theories out there. But make sure that you simplify them and provide some practical examples of how you would actually apply that theory in the day-to-day workspace. Okay. So question 5, define what is meant by the term contextualize. Okay, so if you go to Google and type in vet sector contextualize, that is probably going to give you a good quality definition of what it is, and then you may want to put it into your own terms. Okay, in the simplest form, the word contextualize in vet essentially means to individualize or to make it very specific to an audience. So this could be things like changing the terminology that we use, and it could be using examples that are very specific to an audience. It could be speaking directly about particular types of equipment or particular types of personnel, all these different things. So contextualize is looking at taking a unit of competency or training content and making it very, very specific to an audience. And if we don't do that, then obviously it's going to be perceived as very generic and not appropriate at all. Okay. Question 6, what is the purpose of a session plan? Okay. Well, I see the purpose of a session plan as many different things. And you may want to go to Google and type in session plan, vet sector session plan, training session plan, and see what comes up. But ultimately, the purpose of a session plan is so that a trainer stays on track, a trainer achieves their learning outcomes. The purpose could also be to know what resources are required, to understand the timing of a training session, to understand when and where it will be delivered. It also allows for consistency across trainers. So we need to imagine that if you're writing a session plan and for some strange reason you are not able to deliver that session, you are able to give that session plan to someone else and they are able to hopefully replicate what your intended session was, if that makes sense. All right. Now, there are a number of other answers that you could add into this. Remember, you want to have your own individual perspective on this question as you answer it. Okay. Question 7, what constitutes training materials? Okay. It's a very broad question, but I believe anything that really leads to a training outcome or supports a learning activity, anything that we can use to illustrate a point, anything that we can use to reinforce the learning. So, for example, PowerPoints, for example, handouts, posters, real-world information, SOPs, what else have we got? Case studies, case scenarios, other things could be equipment that you may see in the everyday workplace that will be used by learners and trainees. Okay, and there could be many other things that would constitute training materials. And try and be specific to your industry when you answer this question. Question 8, define verbal and non-verbal communications. Okay. This is one that you probably want to check out in the textbook because they define communication quite well. Also, you may want to check out Google and type in verbal communication, type in non-verbal communication and see what comes up. All right. Ultimately, we don't make this question too complex. You're going to find some quite easy and clear definitions in most places online. Okay. Question 9. What can a trainer facilitator gain by monitoring learner verbal and non-verbal communication? So this can be a very powerful tool and technique for any trainer to gather information as to whether their training content is being received positively, negatively. It can tell us if a learner is engaged, disengaged. It can tell us if a student is maybe confused or they are falling behind, or that they are fully participative and everything is going to plan. So naturally, verbal and non-verbal communication, that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking at when we're trying to make those judgments. Okay. Naturally, in an online environment, it can be a lot harder because we don't have the ability to actually judge as succinctly the non-verbal communication. And sometimes in an online learning environment, we don't get back that response, not because people don't want to, but because we simply can't get visibility on it. Okay. Question 10. What sources of WHS information could you access to determine any hazards in training environment? Okay, so this could be things like, well, you might want to get evacuation procedures. You might want to get hazard reports. You might want to get safety inspection reports. You might want to get, what else could we have? Fire warden information, okay? So just have a think about if you were going to deliver in a particular room in your workplace, what information would you want to know before you deliver training in that area? Okay. Question 11. List the legislation, regulations, codes, and procedures that may be applicable to any trainer or facilitator delivering group sessions. Okay. So we've given a couple of examples there. WHS, anti-discrimination, and you want to put in the year for these. We've got WHS, we've got anti-discrimination. And you probably also want to think about your industry and what kind of regulations and codes. So it could be things like PPE. It could be things like, what else have we got? Anti-bullying and, a number of different ones that can be very specific to particular industries. If you're working in aged care, you would have particular legislation regulations that would apply to that. Childcare, what else may you have? Just different industries are going to have different ones. Okay, so if you're working in the firefighting, you're going to have codes or regulations that would apply to that as well. Okay, if you're working in aviation, you would have CASA legislation and codes, things like that. Okay, so just think about your industry. Food handling, you're going to have codes and practices around food handling, for example. Okay. Question 12, provide one example of culturally sensitive communication. So this could be things like, if I was teaching Aboriginal people, I would need to be careful of the following things. Okay, so the best way to handle this is go to Google and type in culturally sensitive communication and put in a learner group such as Aboriginals, such as Thai students, such as Japanese students, such as Chinese students, such as Italian students, all right? And just get a couple of examples in here. Well, it does say provide one, but more than one is always better, all right? So question 13, what constitutes unacceptable behavior in the learning environment? Okay, now anytime as you're going through this, if you find you don't have enough space to answer the questions, just add in more space by clicking here and doing more space, right? But you can also attach other sheets of paper if you need to provide extra information, all right? And just make sure you indicate the question number. But what constitutes unacceptable behavior in the learning environment? Well, ultimately, anything that's going to disrupt the training session is going to be unacceptable behavior. So you could have people being violent, being disrespectful to other learners, interrupting the trainer, swearing, being late, refusing to do the work, okay, not participating in group activities, okay. So just have a think about, what would be some examples that you may have seen in the past that would constitute unacceptable behavior. Okay. Question 14. What are the different types of questions you can ask during class to gauge the progress of a learner's learning? So this could be, there's no trick to this question. It's basically asking types of questions such as open questions, closed questions, check-in questions, and you may want to put in some examples of them as well, okay? So an example could be, so far, what areas are you finding the most challenging? Or, so far, what do you find is getting even easier as we go through the material, okay? So those are some questions that you could ask. Question 15, list 3 training records that RTOs must keep, okay? So RTOs must keep lots of different types of records. Number 1 could be learner information and enrollment forms. Number 2 could be assessment results. Number 3 could be progress reports and trainer notes. Okay. Another one could be session plans. Another one could be learning program plans. Another one could be training assessment strategies. Another one could be information about funding for any students. Okay, lots of different records, and you may want to even go to Google and type in training records and put dash examples. You're also going to find obviously information in the textbook around that as well. Question 16, explain how you would use the diversity of your learner group as a resource to support and enrich the learning experience. Okay, so diversity is a very important thing to be aware of and embrace. Ultimately, we are never going to have a group which is exactly the same and all individuals have the same characteristics. We want to be able to work with a group no matter how diverse it is, okay? So in a training session, we want to make sure that everybody has opportunities to share, and we want to have opportunities for people to work with groups and really bring new ideas to life through effective facilitation. So you may want to pair up different age groups, pair up people with different life experiences, and use all of those ideas that people may present in your class discussions and use it to your advantage and get people sharing their life experiences in relation to the topic. Okay, so if you want to Google this, you could type in training and put in diversity. You put in how to use diversity and cultural sensitivity in training, all those different kinds of things. Question 17, name and explain the 4 standard steps in effective risk assessment process. Okay, essentially, it's asking you to think about if you were looking to identify risks in a training room or an environment, how would you do that? So number 1 could be inspect the training area. Okay. Number 2 could be I do risk analysis. Okay. Number 3 could be identify hazard. Number 4 could be minimize or remove the hazard. Next one could be fill out report and submit to appropriate people. Okay. However, you may also go to Google and type in risk assessment process and see what comes up and use your own interpretation for those steps there, okay? And also you want to think about your own environment. What would be the 4 steps or even 6 steps or many steps that you would go through in order to identify the major risks in your organization in terms of safety? Question 18, explain the hierarchy of controls. Okay, what this is talking about is essentially the pyramid for the hierarchy of control. So you may even want to draw in the hierarchy of control, and you would do that by going to Google and type in hierarchy of control, and then see what comes up. Draw the pyramid in here, and also you would want to explain PPE and WHS policies, particularly as to maybe an example as to how you would handle it in your workplace, and maybe some example of PPE and what typical PPE would be used in your environment. Okay. Question 19, what effects, positive and negative, can work-based training have in the workplace? Okay, so positive effects could be things like higher motivation. It could be enhanced skills. It could be more loyalty to an organization. It could be a break in the, how do I put it, work, the work activity. So what I mean by that is that people could see it as a very fun and exciting break to their regular schedule. Having said that, negative impacts. Well, we need to think about how is that going to impact productivity and taking people out of the workplace. It could also impact people in the sense of people around them may also be impacted. It can also be costly. Okay, so just have a think about if workplace training took place in your workplace right now or tomorrow, what could be the positive and the negative effects of that? All right. So, question 20. List 4 of the most common adult learner styles. Okay, so without giving it away, we've got visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and number 4 is read write. Okay, so I'd recommend that you look those up, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and read write, and then put in a bit of a description of each of those, okay? And just give us some understanding as to how those people learn best, okay? Question 21, what WHS legislation and regulation covers workplaces in your state, okay? So, you just want to go to Google and type in WHS legislation, Queensland, WHS legislation, New South Wales, WHS legislation, WA, and see what comes up, all right? Ultimately, that's going to be different based on what state you're in, okay? Question 22, why is it important to know about the current work procedures and routines when planning training in the workplace, okay? Well, yeah, this one's not too complicated. It's essentially asking you, why would you want to know that? Well, I'd say so that you don't cause too many disruptions, so that you are able to actually get your learners into the training at the appropriate time, so that you can use the equipment when appropriate, so that you are training people on what's actually being used in the current workplace, okay? It's a pretty straightforward question on this one, okay? And you probably want to chuck in some examples on that as well. All right, question 23. What is a learning pathway? Okay, learning pathway is essentially a roadmap for the kinds of things that, for the exact things that somebody's going to learn as they go through their training. Okay, so a learning pathway is looking at the future. It's going to list out the milestones and the skills that someone's going to learn. It's going to list out potentially the venue, the equipment, where it's going to take place, all those different things. All right. Question 24. Give an example of a contractual requirement that impact upon work-based training. Okay, so as part of apprenticeships and traineeships, there's going to be a lot of contractual requirements, such as the number of hours that a trainee could work, such as can they be paid, how much can they be paid, what types of activities can they do, can they not do, all those different things, okay? Question 25. From whom may you need to obtain agreement when seeking to implement a work-based learning program? If you can, try and relate this back to your workplace. And just have a think about who would be the person you would actually need to get permission from, an agreement from. And this is asking you to think about what would the approval process be for getting something put into place. So immediately what comes to mind is a HR director, HR manager, a workplace supervisor, all those different types of people, okay? So question 26, why is it important to monitor supervisory arrangements for your learner? And I guess, how are we going to monitor, like how are we going to make sure that the program that we have with our learner is being successful? So we want to make sure that a learner is held accountable, and we also want to make sure that the learner is doing the tasks and that the learning outcomes are actually being achieved. Okay, so just have a think about, why would you actually want to keep up to date with what's happening with your learner? Okay, and I imagine you'll be able to grab some answers from that question. Okay, question 27, what does sequencing mean in relation to learning tasks, and why is it important? Okay, well, I guess the simplest way to think about this question is, why would we want to give somebody tasks or learning activities from easiest to hardest? Okay, and I imagine that you'd be able to answer that question. And you may also want to go to Google and type in training dash sequencing or sequencing in training and see what comes up. Okay, but ultimately, one of the biggest reasons that training fails as such is that things are not effectively scaffolded. What I mean by that is that tasks are made too hard, too fast, and people will often lose motivation and they will struggle to keep up. Also, they will see it as beyond their capability and they will throw their hands up in the air and go, nah, it's too hard, and they'll walk out. Okay, so sequencing is very, very important. Okay, so question 28, who sets the objectives in a work-based learning program? Well, that is going to be a number of stakeholders, and typically it's the trainer, typically it is the let's say the supervisor at a workplace in collaboration with an RTO. It could also be have slight input from the trainee themselves. It could also be implied through a particular qualification that they may be undertaking. Okay, so generally it is the supervisor or the manager or anyone that's got a little bit of authority. Okay, question 29. What 5 things may you need to check, confirm in preparation for your session? Okay, so ideally I'd like you to link this to your workplace, and this could be things like, well, I need to check if the equipment works. Well, I need to check if I have electricity and power. I need to check if I've got Wi-Fi. I need to check if the computers are available. I need to check the names of the students. I need to check the shape of the room. I need to check if the IT works. I need to check if support personnel are going to be available. I need to check if I've got enough handouts. I need to check all these different things, okay? So it's very important that we actually get our, I guess, preparation sorted before we aim to deliver a training session. And the better the preparation, the better the training session will go, okay? And maybe also another thing you need to check could be the language literacy and numeracy levels of your learners, okay? So question 20, why is closure important for a training mentoring session? Well, just like opening is important, Just like opening is important to set the stage, so is closure important so that we know, or a learner knows exactly when things have started and finished. But more so, they know when it's finished so that they've got a sense of completion. All right. And also, as part of that closure meeting, you can give powerful feedback to your learner so that they know exactly how they've gone, and they can get a sense of achievement, accomplishment, and also they know that the relationship between the mentor and the training, also the trainer, has come to an end. Okay. Question 31. List 3 ways in which you can gain feedback from your learner or your learners. Okay, now this can be a formal process such as feedback forms. It could be informal conversations at the end of a training session. It could also be informally observing your learners. It could also be on a strategic level, looking at how many students started, how many completed, and getting some data that way. You could also send emails to your learners and get their feedback on ad hoc sessions that you might have run, and asking them specific questions. Okay. So question 32, why and how, in what format, for how long, are records of your learners' performance and achievement retained? Okay. So I'll just give you a hint on this one. Physical records need to be kept for 6 months. Okay, so physical records of assessment need to be kept for 6 months. Okay, now records of qualifications issued need to be kept for 30 years. Okay, now they need to be kept for auditing purposes. They also need to be kept for purposes such as a student wants to get access to a qualification certificate that maybe they did 3 years ago or 5 years ago or even 29 years ago, for example, right? But ultimately, the RTO needs to keep records just in case a RTO is ever audited, and they always are. So we need to make sure that we've got our records to prove how students were trained and what qualifications were issued. Now, in terms of what format, we want to keep it electronically. We want to keep a hard copy in filing cabinets, and those filing cabinets need to be locked, and they need to be fireproof and floodproof ideally. Okay. Question 33, when making recommendations, changes relating to work-based learning pathway, how would you record these and who would you present them to? So probably you'd want to make them, you want to make the changes electronic. You want to send them through to the appropriate stakeholders. You want to do that by email, and you want to present it to them in a professional written manner. Okay, those kind of things. Question 34. Describe a situation in your experience when a training session didn't go well and explain why based on a learning theory that you think applies. So you want to go back to the learning theories question up the top. I think it was around question 5 or 6. And you want to think about in the past, okay, a training session didn't go well. Maybe the students were not fully engaged, and have a think about, well, why was that? What learning theory was at play in that training session? So it could have been behavioralist learning theory. It could have been Malcolm Knowles' learning assumptions. Maybe the students were not motivated and they didn't see any relevance to the training, whatever it might be, okay? But let's think about some examples of training not going well. People don't turn up. What else? People don't actively participate. What else? Students don't progress on their assessments. What else? Difficult personalities. All right. What else? The equipment doesn't go well. What else? Students are not supportive of each other, or they're not supportive of being in the training itself. Okay, lots of different things in terms of why training may not go well. Okay. Question 35. What are 3 fundamental principles of learning that must be in place for successful learning to take place? Okay. Well, I would say that one of them would be that learners need to feel good about themselves. Okay. And another one could be that sessions are appropriately scaffolded. So what I suggest that you do is go to Google and type in learning principles and see what comes up. Okay. All right, question 36. What are 7 principles of effective communication and how would you ensure that you utilize them within your training session? So hint, hint, nudge, nudge. What I suggest you do is go to Google and type in 7 principles of effective communication, because there is literally blog articles about the 7 principles of effective communication. All right, so you're going to find quite a bit there. But ultimately, you can bring in your own ideas as well. All right. So, for example, one of them could be that information is clear, information is concise, information is relevant. Okay. All these different ones that you will just immediately think of, and then think, how would you make your information clear? How would you make it concise? How would you make it relevant to your audience? Okay. So make sure that you answer that aspect of the question as well. All right. Question 37, list 6 common presentation aids or materials that you would use to support your presentations. Okay. Now, these could be handouts, PowerPoint, slip charts, posters, let's see, workplace documents, signs from your workplace. All these different things. So we've got space for you to list 6 here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just list in what would be some aids and visual things that you would use to support your presentations. All right. So I hope that's made sense. It's not a trick question. Okay. So that, folks, is the end of the short answer questions. So what I need you to do here is sign it and pop the date. Okay. And that's all you need to do. So don't make sure you just do it for the first one there, not the second and the third. You don't need to do that. Okay. So this, folks, has been the webinar for the short answer questions, and the second webinar in this series about the delivery cluster will be about the projects that you'll go through in terms of your full course delivery and the other aspects to the cluster of delivery. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this webinar. We hope it's been helpful, and good luck on your assessment with the short answer questions. If at any time you've got any further questions, feel free to give the office a call or send them an email. All right, thank you so much.